Hello YouTube! I hope you're all doing okay. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. My name is Emily and today I'm going to be talking about 5 underrated fantasy books/series. You may have heard of some of these books before. If so, excellent. But these are books I feel like have not been discussed enough on BookTube, and some I straight up feel like have not been mentioned. So today I want to love on some of those books. So let's get right to it. Let's talk about some books. The first book I want to love on is The Twisted Tree by Rachel Burge. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I love this book. This book is about a girl called Martha who is blinded in one eye after an accident, but then acquires the ability to sense people's emotions through their clothing. This leads her to want to find answers about her ability, and she wants to seek out her grandmother to do so. She goes to visit her grandmother in her cabin in Norway, but then finds she's unfortunately deceased. Instead, she finds there's a stranger living in her place, and there are bloodthirsty creatures trying to kill everyone in the area. I read this book last fall, and I absolutely loved it. This story incorporates a lot of Norse folklore and Norse mythology, and of course, I always love a story incorporating Norse mythology. This book had such a great atmosphere. It was just this combination of cozy wintertime bundle up and eat warm food, but it was also this horror with these mythical creatures trying to come and consume you. But it was also such an amazing story of family and self-acceptance. I loved seeing Martha grow into her power, and I loved how this ordeal helped her connect with her family, even ancestors of long past. An interesting tidbit is that when I saw Rachel Burge speak on a panel at York, she said that the goddess Hel, or the Norse goddess of death, actually came to her and spoke a monologue to her, and that is in the book, and reading it was amazing. I felt like I was actually accessing this really sacred experience. This book is also dedicated to Odin, which I love because Odin is really my god. So when I met Rachel Burge and she was signing my book for me, I actually got to ask her about her experiences with Norse gods. And she told me that Odin actually had a hand in getting this book published. For instance, she told me all her meetings with publishers would happen on Wednesdays. And of course, Wednesday is Odin's Day, but that was just mind-blowing, and when I read this, I felt like I was holding somebody's divine experience in my hands. But in any case, if you want a book that is cozy winter fantasy with Norse mythology and just a bit of horror, this is a great book for that. Next up is A Skinful of Shadows by Frances Hardinge. This is about a girl called Makepeace who is growing up in a Puritan community during the English Civil War. And the thing about Makepeace is that she has the ability or a space inside her to house spirits. So she is the perfect spirit vessel. So she grows up with her mother. One day her mother is killed in a tragic accident, and in her grief she lowers her guard and a spirit, and not an entirely human one, makes its way in. But in the aftermath of her mother's death, she is forced to live with her father's family, who may not have the best intentions for her. Her father's family wants to exploit this ability of hers, so she has to find a way to use this power to actually defend herself. First of all, this book is a great piece of historical fiction. I always love historical fantasy where characters feel like they really reside in an era. I loved that she could give you pieces of information about the dynamic of the English Civil War without really dumping a lot of historical knowledge on you. But this is also a great story about someone coming into themselves and into their own power. Makepeace starts out as this person who doesn't want to be seen, and she becomes someone who's just so resourceful and helps other people out. But this book is also straight up terrifying. There's this huge body snatchers vibe. The extent to which this extended family wants to preserve their immortality and maintain power is absolutely terrifying. But I do highly recommend this book, and I actually really want to read more of Frances Hardinge's books. She is just such a great writer. Next up, I want to recommend State of Sorrow by Melinda Salisbury. This is about a girl called Sorrow who is the daughter of the chancellor of this country called Ram, Ranen. This country is supposed to have democratically elected chancellors, but this is basically a farce because Sorrow's family is basically the only ruling family in Ranen, and they are the de facto leaders of the land. So before Sorrow was born, her mother died giving birth to her, and her brother was killed in an accident. This accident was somewhat caused by her father's hubris. So her entire court is in a state of perpetual mourning for her brother. So she has basically grown up in his shadow. So she is constantly trying to prove herself worthy of her father, even though she is in the shadow of a deceased brother. So meanwhile, her country is in an uneasy peace with another nation called Rilla. But one day, this country reveals a secret to Sorrow and her father, which could really upend the way that they've been living their whole lives. And it also potentially introduces a lot of political turmoil to the country. This is very much a political fantasy. I mean, there's some fantasy here, but mostly it's a very political story. So basically, if you really love politics in your fantasy, this is a very good book for that. Not gonna lie, it's a little bit confusing what the differences are between the two nations. I always felt like the people from Rilla are kind of elvish and a little bit magical, but then people from Ranen, like Sorrow, are just sort of normies. But apart from that, I loved the world building of this book, and Melinda Salisbury really knows how to describe things, buildings or food. And also there's some really decent character work here. I really loved how Sorrow had to keep a head on her shoulders through some really stressful situations. She's just a person who's had to grow up really fast and learn to take up the reins where her father has failed. Also, this book ended on a horrible cliffhanger, but I have the second book, which I plan to read soon. This book actually came in a fairy loot last year, actually, but I feel like I've not heard enough people talk about this book, so I just want to love on it. This is a great book. Next up, I want to talk about Kushiels Dart by Jacqueline Carey. This is the first book in the Kushiels Legacy series. The world of Kushiels Dart is basically medieval Europe. So the countries are all basically the same, except they have different names. Spain is Aragonia, England is Alba. Italy is Cerdica Unitas, which I appreciated because Italy did used to be a bunch of united city-states. So France, in which the story is primarily set, is called Terre d'Ange, or Country of Angels. And they are in constant conflict with a nation called Skaldia, which is basically an amalgamation of Germanic and Norse peoples. Basically, they're Vikings, but in Terre d'Ange, they worship a group of angels. The mythology behind this is that a group of rebellious angels came to Terre d'Ange, sought shelter there, and now they are worshipped. This country also has a big culture of courtesans who are sometimes used for political purposes. Our main character is Phaedra, who is training to be a courtesan slash spy. She is also set apart because she is born with a red spot in her iris. This is a Kushiels Dart, which means she derives pleasure from pain. It's called as such because the god or angel Kushiel is known for his cruelty. So Phaedra basically really enjoys being a courtesan. She has a lot of fun with it, and she loves collecting information. But one day she discovers a plot against the crown and gets in way over her head, and that's where the real story actually takes off. I thought this story was a great exploration of not only politics, but also sex work. I know courtesans is not a new idea in European culture. There were a lot of them, but I thought this was a really interesting exploration about how courtesanship could actually be defined as a divine duty. Basically, in this country's mythology, the angel Nama sold her body to different people while she was trying to support her angelic siblings while they were trying to survive in their early days in Terre d'Ange. So the act of being a courtesan is also seen as a divine duty. You are in service to Nama. So although the idea of courtesans is not new in European history, I thought it was a really interesting exploration of how the act of being a courtesan could actually be a sacrificial act and an act of service. And also the story explores how sexual consent actually operates in a culture like this. And as always, I really love the world building of this story. It's not really high fantasy, it's actually quite low fantasy. In fact, I don't think we see that many fantastical elements in a lot of this first book. But nonetheless, this world is very well drawn, very detailed, and quite lush. So I highly recommend Kushiels Dart. It's excellent a female authored fantasy. It's definitely quite a departure from a lot of fantasy that I have read. I think it's well known in a lot of fantasy circles, but not in the BookTube world. So read Kushiel's Dart. It's a good book. Last but not least, I have to give a big shout out to the Three Dark Crowns series. This is not the first book. I realized my copy of the first book is in my parents' house in the States. This is the second book, One Dark Throne. For those of you who have been watching me for a while, you have heard me describe the series ad nauseum. But this is a series about an island queendom. Every generation, the queen gives birth to a set of triplet girls, and each of these girls has a different ability corresponding to the different magical factions of the island. So you have the poisoners, you have naturalists, and elementalists. And when these girls turn 16, they have to fight to the death for the throne. There's a lot of politics at play as well because each magical faction is trying to get their own girl onto the throne. There's also a religious order that is supposed to be unbiased but isn't always. But this is such a great story. I was so blown away when I first read it. This is basically a matriarchal Game of Thrones. I love all the characters who are at play, and I love seeing different people's schemes play out, different people's plans. I loved all the character conflict within all the sisters as well because they have love for each other but also duties to their own factions. My favorite sister is Catherine. The other ones are okay, but Catherine's my favorite. I want her to be happy. I actually haven't finished this series, which is kind of embarrassing because I love it so much. I just have not found the time to read the last book, even though I have prioritized it for this year. But I will be finishing it quite soon, I'm pretty sure. I just haven't seen this book praised enough on BookTube. I know that people have read it. It was on the popular YA list that I just ranked in an earlier video, but people just aren't raving about it enough. People aren't appreciating it enough, I feel like. Every book takes a little while to set up, but really it's just moving all of the different figures and set pieces into place. It's kind of like how when Game of Thrones was good, the first episode would take a lot of time to move everyone into place and set everything up. But yeah, this is an absolutely fantastic series and I highly recommend, and if you haven't read it, I demand that you read it now. So that's it for my underrated fantasy books. I hope you found something in here that maybe you haven't read before and now want to explore. If you have read any of these books, please tell me your thoughts. I hope you are staying as isolated as you can in this chaotic time. Like this video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel if you want more of this content. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and Goodreads, and I will see you in my next video.